What is going on, fellas? It's your boy On The Money MMA reacting to some of the newly made matchups for UFC 317 on International Fight Week and UFC 319 in Chicago they announced. And these are some sick matchups, so I'm not going to waste your time and I'm going to get right into it. First of all, Cry Car France for what you did to Steve Ursig. You're fucked. You're fucked. You're done for. Alejandro Pantoja is taking your freaking head off. Your nasty little vermin rodent head off. You freaking field mouse. You field mouse. You're done for. You're cooked. You're cooked, Kai Car France. You're done for. Death by Pantoja. On June 28th, Kai Car France dies for his sins. He dies for his sins. And regardless of my personal hatred for Kai Car France, I don't see anything he has for Pantoja in this fight, dude. What are you going to do? Knock out Pantoja? I don't even think that's possible. This dude was getting his head flipped backwards by Deiveson Figueiredo, and he still didn't go out. So, even ignoring my hatred for this little rodent, he has nothing for Pantoja, and I don't think he'll win this matchup. My early prediction would be a win for Pantoja by submission or knockout. Pardon me, submission or decision. Moving on to the matchup you are most likely waiting for, or are creaming yourselves in anticipation of. Charles Oliveira takes on Ilia Topuria, International Fight Week main event, and in the same sense as Kai Car France, Charles Oliveira, you're done for. You're cooked. You're absolutely done for. What are you gonna do to Ilia Topuria that number one he hasn't seen before, and that number two is gonna catch him off guard, man? There's nothing that Charles has on the feet, or honestly, there is something to the sense that we haven't seen the extent of Ilia's defensive grappling and his offensive grappling. So we haven't really had a good example of that. But I think that Ilia's gonna be a physical guy in this fight that Charles is just not going to be able to control or dominate on the ground. So in that case, I think that Ilia knocks the freaking head off of Charles Oliveira. Anybody Charles has ever gotten dropped by, a Makhachev. Makhachev isn't a guy who has crazy power in his hands. Gaethje has power in his hands, but he rarely is a flatline KO guy. And Poirier was knocking this dude down left and right, and Poirier is more of a guy that he chips and he breaks you down like a wall. He starts at the bottom and he chips away till the wall falls down. Ilia Topuria is a guy who can flatline you sleeping out cold, and I see that exact thing happening to Charles Oliveira in this fight. There's no path to victory for Charles Oliveira, and I'm not even a big Charles Oliveira fan. Honestly, I think he's a bit of a crybaby. He doesn't really deserve this title shot. I think Armin deserves it more than him. But I mean, Ilia's just gonna scramble him like some eggs, dude. Charles is done for. This is probably the note. This is probably the thing that's gonna spring the end of his career. And I think we'll be seeing Ilia Topuria becoming the champion this June on June 28th, and that's really what I see happening in this fight. So. And I know we're all upset that this probably means the end of Ilia versus Islam Makhachev conversations, but I spoke in depth on why I like the Jack Della Maddalena Islam fight just as much as I like the Ilia Islam fight. So in this reality, we're getting two really good fights on top of Ilia probably becoming champ and him fighting all those guys at lightweight, and we're getting the welterweight fight. So I know it's sad, but ultimately I think this was the only course of action that was going to happen, just due to Islam Makhachev's attitude towards the Ilia fight. So I think the UFC did a great job on this. This is obviously a sick fight. In tandem, Dana White announced that they're going to make the JDM fight as well. So they're both two confirmed things. Islam actually vacated the title, so it will be an undisputed title fight for Ilia and Charles. And MMA Joey, I'm gonna go and do my victory lap here. You were calling out Ilia Topuria's boy on being wrong and saying that it was gonna be an undisputed title fight, and he turned out to be right. What the fuck is wrong with you, MMA Joey? How about you stay in your goddamn place? How about that? So again, sick fight. I'm actually really excited with the UFC on this one. I think they did the best with the cards they were dealt, so I think this is going to be a great fight. I think it'll probably be an early or midway through finish for Ilia Topuria, and the Ilia Topuria hype train is only going to continue and grow. I think this is in line of my opinion that people should just be a little less critical on the UFC. Yes, there are some problems, but ultimately in these harsh times where they're having to dispute fighters and get these matchups done, they ultimately do the best that they can. So I am satisfied with the UFC on this one. It's obviously going to be a huge fight. We're all going to be in anticipation of it, and I'm probably going to move into the next fight right now because there's a lot of hype on this one too. Dricus du Plessis takes on Khamzat Chimaev in the main event of UFC 319 Chicago, and again, another instance of great matchmaking by the UFC. This was obviously the fight that everybody wanted to go down and that needed to happen. And honestly, if I'm looking at this fight from a breakdown position, I'm trying to break it down, I'm going to have to go with DDP on this one, dude. I think Khamzat has become a little blown out of the water. If Robert Whittaker doesn't break his jaw, I feel like we see a somewhat different fight. It's like we all had this narrative that Khamzat can't go into a round past the first, but as soon as he got another first round finish, we all just ignored it and hopped back on the train. And obviously it was a great win, and he deserves props for it, but it's like we got to have some consistency here. And I think that going to war with Khamzat, or going to war with Gilbert Burns and going to war with Kamaru Usman, even though that wasn't a war, it was just a really close fight, I don't think that's a good sign for his success at middleweight. He's fighting a very physically imposing, powerful middleweight now, and I think that's just going to be a completely different fight from his little scuffles at 170 with Gilbert Burns and his scuffle with Kamaru Usman coming up to 185. I see DDP coming as a more intelligent, aware opponent than Gilbert Burns has had in the past, or Khamzat Chimaev has had in the past. I see DDP being a smart guy, evading the bad situations on the ground with this guy, and TKOing him later in the rounds. That's the only thing I can see happening in this fight, honestly. DDP is too strong and savvy on the ground to just get walked through by Khamzat Chimaev, dude. He's the most game opponent Khamzat Chimaev has ever faced, and Khamzat Chimaev has gone to really close fights with a lot of fighters who aren't on DDP's level, so I'm just going to have to pick DDP on this one. Honestly, another great instance of matchmaking on the UFC's hands. I think it's going to be a good fight. It'll probably be a scuffle for as long as it lasts, but as soon as we get to the deep waters and we see that DDP is the guy who has been to those deep waters before and is willing to swim in those deep waters, I think that's when DDP gets it done. I just don't see a world where Khamzat just pulls this incredible cardio out of nowhere, especially for a guy who is gonna extinguish so much energy trying to get DDP out of there as soon as the fight starts. And I just don't see him finishing DDP. I think DDP is too good. I think he's superior to all of the opponents Khamzat has fought in the past, and I think he's really gonna show levels to Khamzat in this fight, and we're gonna have Dricus du Plessis staying as the champion of the middleweight division, and he's probably gonna be fighting a guy like Kyle Bahalyo, or obviously Imavov should be the next rightful contender after Khamzat Chimaev. I just don't see Khamzat Chimaev has gotten all this hype, but it feels like nobody can say consistent on their opinions on this guy that he isn't a cardio monster, that he really struggles with the cardio, and that's the area in which he struggles with the most. So I do see DDP winning this fight, and I don't see any other avenue for Khamzat Chimaev to win this fight other than early first round finish, and that's just something I really don't think will happen to Dricus du Plessis, who is a guy who has showcased his fight IQ and his ability to analyze situations and find the easiest route to victory. Like, he improved drastically from the first Sean Strickland fight to the second Sean Strickland fight, and he really took advantage of Israel Adesanya's weaknesses, and he fucked up Robert Whittaker too in a way that I think is a lot more impressive than the way Khamzat Chimaev did it, honestly, just because obviously Robert Whitaker is a guy who spends his time on the feet, and Khamzat Chimaev kind of made him a duck out of water. But I think Dricus du Plessis isn't a guy who's going to be tapping to any lousy injury to the face due to the face crank of Khamzat Chimaev. I just think he's going to be a guy who's going to escape, get up, and honestly, he'll probably be a guy who encourages the takedown and shoots his own takedowns in this fight, just because he's a guy who's so well-rounded and is comfortable in so many aspects of the fight. So yeah, I see DDP winning this fight. I'm going to glaze the UFC again. Great matchmaking. I love that this fight is being made. It really mirrors the good state I think the UFC is in at this point. Honestly, there's some critiques you can have, but I don't really have many. I'm really happy about the way the UFC is going right now. So yeah, DDP by honestly third or fourth round TKO once Khamzat blows his wad. Also announced for UFC 317 is a previously made matchup, I think, between Paulo Costa and Roman Kopylov. Costa is a guy who is declining in his career. I think he's not the physical, imposing guy he once was, or maybe that's just the evolution of skill in the middleweight division. But Roman Kopylov, a guy who's rising, whose last loss was to Anthony Hernandez, who has a completely different skill set from Paulo Costa. Honestly, right now, I see a Roman Kopylov win just due to his savviness on the feet and Paulo Costa's lack thereof, and his lack of critical knockout power that I think he needs to put Roman Kopylov away, who is a tough guy, as showcased in what comes to mind in my memory is the Chris Curtis fight, where Roman Kopylov showed his ability to take a lot of hard shots. So Roman Kopylov is probably who I'm going to predict to win in this fight. Probably I'm not going to say a TKO, but I think he'll win a 3-round decision in terms of damage, and I think he'll outstrike Paulo Costa. Moving on to the next matchup on UFC 317. Another previously made matchup, Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano. I'm somewhat happy with this fight. I wish we would have seen a Ruffy Dariush fight, because I think Ruffy is a guy who is a lot more inspiring to me in the lightweight division than a guy like Renato Moicano. But either way, this will be a good fight on the ground, on the feet. I'm going to have a tough time picking this one. Honestly, Beneil Dariush has shown to be a guy who can negate good grappling, and I think that's what has shown to be Renato Moicano's strength. But I think that ultimately Beneil Dariush has declined so much in his career that I think Renato Moicano will win the exchanges on the feet, and when it goes to the ground, I think Renato Moicano has already shown his ability to land devastating ground and pound and finish fights like he did in the Benoit Saint-Denis fight and the Jalen Turner fight. So I'd probably have to go with, in this fight here, Renato Moicano to honestly beat Dariush by a second round TKO. I think Dariush is just done. He hit his peak of his career about right before the Charles Oliveira fight, and then he got knocked out by Charles, and then later knocked out by Arman Tsarukyan, who is a guy who doesn't usually knock people out. So I think Moicano will have the ability to outstrike and hurt Beneil Dariush on the feet, just because I think Beneil Dariush has taken so much of a step back, and that is probably why I will be picking Renato Moicano to win this matchup. Now, this matchup I think was made for UFC Fight Night Abu Dhabi, taking place in June or July. It is Sharapoutin Magomedov versus Marc-Andre Barriault. I think I'm going to obviously take Sharapoutin Magomedov to win this fight. Marc-Andre Barriault got a really good win against Bruno Silva a couple days ago, but Bruno Silva is a shell of his former self. He's not even a competitive UFC fighter at this point. So I think I will take Sharapoutin Magomedov to knock out Marc-Andre Barriault in the first or second round, just due to Marc-Andre Barriault's age and his showcasing of his lack to take a lot of critical damage from guys like Joe Pyfer and other guys he's been finished by in the past, like Dustin Stoltzfus. I don't even think Dustin Stoltzfus is on the level of a guy like Shar Magomedov. So I think Shar Magomedov will completely mog this guy on the striking, and that'll end up in a KO. Honestly, Barriault has some effective durability, so I think he will probably survive to a third round decision in this fight, and ultimately end up losing to Sharaput Magomedov by 30-27 decision. One thing I will not praise the UFC for is their constant need to put Justin Tafa on the main card of pay-per-views. This is UFC 317. It's not UFC 301 in Brazil. It's not a weak card. This is supposed to be the strongest card of the year. If you put fucking Justin Tafa on the main card of UFC 317, Dana White, but I mean, by the time the card happens, if it's still on the main card, over Royval Cobb, that's a number one contenders fight at flyweight. It's completely unbelievable. I will march my way into UFC headquarters and I'll plant first a knee to the solar plexus of Dana White, and then I'll land a absolutely astronomical backhand to the face of Dana White for his need to put Justin Tafa on the main card of pay-per-views against, I'm sorry, who was he fighting? I don't even remember at this point. No way. Justin Tafa shouldn't sniff a main card if his life depended on it. If he had cancer and he needed to survive, and his way to survive, and he would be cured if he was on the main card of a pay-per-view and the UFC did him a favor. He shouldn't be on the main card even in that case. He just got slept by Taliesin Teixeira. Before that, I think he lost a few more fights. So that's something I'm really pissed at the UFC about. Put Cop Royval over that. And honestly, I think UFC 317 could use a couple more really good fights. That I can't think of any at the moment that I would suggest, but honestly, other than that, I think these are great announcements. I'm very excited for all the fights that Dana White announced today. Definitely a heavy announcement, including the confirmation of Jack Della Maddalena and Islam Makhachev and Islam Makhachev's his choice to vacate the lightweight belt. So ultimately, a great number of announcements. I'm very happy about all of these, and I appreciate all you guys watching, and I will see you in the next video. Cry Car France, you're fucked. You're fucked for what you did to her sake. You're fucked for what you did to her sake. And if Alejandro Pantoja doesn't flatline you out cold, I will. And mark my freaking words, dude. I'm gonna march my way down to New Zealand, where you reside, and I'm gonna sleep you out cold, and you're never gonna breathe again. So Cry Car France, count your days. You're done for. And you guys have a very nice day. Thank you for watching, and leave any constructive criticism or comments or honestly debates in the comment section. I will be happy to debate you like I did school that one guy in terms of the JDM matchup because he thought that Bilal lost just because of his game plan, which is an absolutely brain dead take. But regardless, have a nice day, and I will see you guys until next time, like Lucas Tracy says.